Have you ever had an experience where a word or words come out of your mouth really strangely? Like, maybe you're feeling a bit nervous or awkward, so you put on a weird accent or something. And like internally, you're like... Well, I have an experience like this that has haunted me for nearly a decade now. It was just 6 little words, one in particular, that just came out of my mouth so strangely, and it just happened to be to someone really famous. It was 2015, and I just moved to London with that typical Perth gal dream. I wanted to actually need to wear a nice coat. And I wanted to travel and explore Europe every other weekend. So with that in mind, I decided I should probably try and do something completely different to what I'd done for several years in Perth, in Australia. I'd worked in the film and television industry where there is virtually no work-life balance. So I get to London and I decide I'm going to try and do something completely different. I trawled job ads for weeks and I actually completely lost the will to live. I didn't even have a starting point. I'd never actually written a proper CV or job application before. All of my jobs generally had come through word of mouth. So a few weeks in, fortunately, I'd had some free accommodation, but my bank account was starting to wane. I was barely affording my Costa coffee and my Sainsbury's shopping trip. Waitrose completely out of the question. So I decided to give in, and fortunately for me, the bush telegraph of the Oz film industry extended all the way to London, and I landed a job through a friend of a friend. It was just a 2-week short gig. I was to help out the very overwhelmed production team on the film Florence Foster Jenkins. So it was the last 2 weeks of pre-production before they start shooting. It was a 2-hour commute, and I get to Twickenham studio, my butterflies in my stomach's going nuts. Ready to start my 10-hour day. I get whisked off to this little office with the intern. He was an interesting guy. He was one of those interns who really didn't understand the concept of needing to do a bit of shit-kicking before you're the director. And it became apparent to me he really was not interested in helping with any of the minor tasks I'd been assigned. And I eventually learned he'd come from a very well-off family in the Middle East. In fact, there were a lot of people on the crew who were very well connected. Nepotism was really rife in the UK industry. Although it's not all bad, Richard E. Grant's daughter made a wonderful cast PA. Anyway, I just absolutely worked my butt off. I'm working class Australian, and it turns out that if you only have Australian film experience, you're basically on par with the intern. So this is my specialty. I love being an underdog. I love proving myself. I absolutely worked my butt off, and by the end of those 2 weeks, my face was filled with stress and cold sores. And it turns out that this style of mine is quite divisive. So one of the senior production team members just absolutely loathed me. And I'm not exactly sure why, but the feeling definitely ended up being mutual. And then the more senior, unfortunately, I gained a bit of... I caught her eye and caught her admiration for working so hard. When my contract was coming to an end at the end of those 2 weeks, she pulled me aside with some very exciting news. She said, "We're on the hunt for a PA for Meryl Streep, and we think you could be a good fit." I was so excited. I very eloquently replied, "But I have cold sores." And she was really sweet, and she laughed, and she said, "Don't worry, I get them too, but..." All that needs to happen now is we need Meryl to meet you and approve. And just like that, I was Anne Hathaway in Devil Wears Prada. Actually, unfortunately, it turns out that meeting Meryl Streep, even when you're being put forward to be her cast PA, is basically like trying to get a sighting of Bigfoot. They wanted the meeting to just be organic. So I would just have to wait by for the phone call that Meryl was on the move, rush down, casually try and wait by as she comes out of a costume fitting to try and organically meet her. Couple of days of this, back and forthing, And unfortunately, we got word that the ever-humble Meryl decided she didn't need a PA on the film. But the production had me now, entrapment. And without much discussion, I was designated the role for the rest of the production as the senior production secretary, which the production secretary was not too happy about until I got delegated most of her work, and then she cheered up a bit. I got lumped with some real corkers of jobs, one of which is script distribution, which I'll just quickly tell you about because it sounds really easy, like you just hand out scripts, right? But there's hundreds of cast and crew that always need to have the most up-to-date script. And this is pre-COVID, so we've got digital copies, but we've also got hard copies. That paper copy of that script alone, hours to print. Everyone starts with that full paper copy, and then every time there's changes, and there's a lot of changes, you release a new set of script changes on the paper in different colours. So we started off with blue, pink, we went all the way through the reflex rainbow to cherry, goldenrod, ash, salmon, and then we cycled around again. And so what you do when you get your script pages is you take out your white page, you put in your blue page, but then you might need to take out your blue page to put in your salmon page, so you've got the most up-to-date script. We went through so many colours that we had to go around again, and then we had to designate movie titles. So we ended up with Blue Velvet amendments, Pink Panther amendments, Salmon Like It Hot amendments. And the biggest nightmare being that a cast member might rock up to set and have the wrong lines because the senior production secretary hasn't sent them their Salmon Like It Hot script revisions. And then there was the hours I was pulling. There was one night where I was at the studio until 2 a.m. printing scripts for a cast read-through that was to start at 5. I was to be there at 5 a.m. to hand out the scripts. And then there was another time where I was scheduled to start at 6 a.m. at King's Cross Station to hand out the train tickets to all the crew heading to Liverpool. Then I was to get on the train and head to Liverpool, wait all day, pick up the film rushes at the end of the day, get back on the train, get back to central London to hand them to the post facility at midnight. And then I was scheduled to do 6 to 12 the next day. So guys, I have boundaries. This is where I drew the line. I sent an email and I said, I just want to draw your attention that I'm doing 2 back-to-back 17-hour days and I'm only getting paid for 10. And I get a phone call from the senior production team member who kind of hated my guts. And he had this really unusual way of speaking. He said, "Hi, Chloe, I just got your email." And proceeded to tell me there was actually nothing they could do about that. And in fact, every time I would call him, and usually it was to just troubleshoot some problems or something, he would tell me, "Someone's really urgently calling and I'll have to call you back." And then my mate, who was working quite closely next to him, would run outside, call me and tell me no one was calling. I just kind of dealt these blows for a while, but there were some really cool tasks that I got designated as well, let alone the trauma bonds that were formed. One of my cool tasks was prepping the cast green rooms. These turned into epic shopping trips, which were great when I got one of the production van and drivers. But if they weren't available, it was tough bickies. I was on the tube lugging rugs from Zara and heavy bags full of diffusers and candles and pot plants, and I just made it happen. And in a way, I kind of became like the dirty secret of the PA to Meryl Streep. So I would come in at the end of filming or at the start of the day and fill her green room with all of her favourite things. For example, tea, PG tips, wine, Sancerre, and flowers, think English country garden. And if she liked the flowers, they'd disappear from the green room at the end of the day and she'd take them home, which was every bunch I ever bought except one. And I'll never forget it. The sheen of sweat that formed on my brow that morning at that florist was so sparse, not a peony in sight. I had to take a chance on a bunch of rather funereal-looking red roses paired with baby's breath. And there they were in her green room at the end of the day, like a sharp slap in the face. Then finally the day came where I was to meet the Meryl Streep. The cast and crew were out shooting on location somewhere, but Meryl had a day off shooting and was to come to the studio for a costume fitting. So it was just myself and the production secretary to man the office. I was to be the meet and greet and tend to all of Meryl's needs. The production secretary was on strict instructions to man the office. She was not to come and have anything to do with Meryl. So let me paint the picture of where my head was at that morning. It had been drilled into me over the years to be professional and cool and calm around cast. Obviously, we're just there to help them do their job, no fangirling or anything like that. But it was Meryl freaking Streep, and I was really excited, and I really wanted her to like me, I'm not gonna lie. And I'd had this experience a few years earlier. I was working on The Great Gatsby in Sydney, and I just happened to be lucky enough to get an introduction to Leonardo DiCaprio. And it came out of nowhere, and he said, "Hi, I'm Leo." And I went, "Hi, I'm Chloe." And nothing came to my mind. And he just stood there staring with his beautiful blue eyes and this very, very bad foundation, and excused himself. Just nothing came to my mind. And this time I thought, I really want to try and be a bit charming. And I kind of thought, like, maybe I'll play the Aussie girl, like cute, quirky card. Like, that's kind of working for me in the UK. They love Kath and Kim over here. And then the other thing, I can be a bit impressionable when I'm hanging around people a lot. I'm like a little bit of a single white female. So like I've been known to copy handwriting of my besties, or quite often I get told, "You sounding like your friend." And I just kind of pick up on these things a little bit. And I'd been hanging out with this guy a lot who said words like email. Yeah. And so anyway, the moment was upon us. I get the phone call, Meryl's about to touch down, and then, of course, who bloody appears but that production secretary who's come up with an excuse why she needs to be there, and then suddenly I feel like I'm Kevin Costner in The Bodyguard, and I'm shooing around there to shove her into cupboards and get rid of her, and so I'm quite flustered when Meryl finally arrives. But I greet her, I show her to her dressing room, and then I say it. I say the thing. I look her square in the eye, flirty smile, and I say, "Can I get you a beverage?" And honestly, I don't know if I shimmied, but in my memory, I shimmied. And sadly, Meryl kind of looked at me like I'm a bit, like we're on first name basis. No, we're not. She looked at me a bit weirdly and she said, "No, thank you." No, I couldn't get Meryl a beverage. And that was my one and only job in London. Look, I made a weekend to Paris at one point, and several years later, I solo backpacked Europe at 31 by myself. But that was my one and only job in the film industry in London. I came home not long after that, and slowly but surely I have made my way out of the film industry. Now I work in reality, and I tell you what, work-life balance, way better, plenty of time for beverages. Thank you.